So chapter 14 is about water pollution. We talked a lot about different things with water when we did our unit on water, but now we're going to revisit them looking specifically at pollution. Your book opens up with the case study of the Chesapeake Bay. It's the largest estuary in the United States, and it gets water from Virginia, Maryland, Delaware. It's supplied by many rivers and streams over long distances that go through urban areas, suburban areas, agricultural areas, and as those streams pass through on their way to the Chesapeake Bay, they pick up nutrients and they pick up sediments, they pick up chemicals, they pick up 600 million pounds of nitrogen, they pick up 30 million pounds of phosphorus, and they also pick up water from sewage treatment, they pick up animal waste, and it picks up fertilizer, which leads to algae blooms, and it picks up sediments, which leads to cloudy water, and so then there's no grasses that can grow because there's not enough light penetration for the fish and for the crabs. It also picks up anthropogenic or human chemicals like pesticides, pharmaceutical drugs. In 2009, and the reason we sort of paid attention to this, Fish and Wildlife Service found that 23% of the male largemouth bass and 82% of the male smallmouth bass were developing into hermaphrodites. There was a concern raised for both fish and humans and equaled the Chesapeake Bay Action Plan. It's a big problem to solve because you can see all the different pieces. We can't just fix the Chesapeake Bay without dealing with all of these different states and all of this different water that feeds into the Chesapeake Bay. So water pollution is a big problem because of the way it spreads. So what is water pollution? Water pollution is the contamination of streams, lakes, oceans, or groundwater with substances produced through human activities that negatively affect organisms. We have two different types of pollution that we need to be aware of. One is called point source pollution. And point source pollution has a distinct location that pumps its waste. So this is, we can see the pipe that the factory is pumping into the lake. We can see the sewage that is being pumped directly into the lake. We know the point from which that pollution is coming. We also have non-point source pollution. Non-point source pollution is much more difficult and much more vague. It's a diffuse location. So it's things like we have runoff from farming or from suburbs or from storm runoff. It's much more difficult to control because we don't know where it's coming from. Whose yard, whose farm is contributing to that pesticide runoff. Examples are pollutants, humans and animal waste, inorganic substances, organic compounds, synthetic organic compounds, non-chemical pollutants. All of these things can be run into our waters and we don't know exactly where they're coming from. So types of pollutants that we are going to look at are human wastewater, inorganic substances such as heavy metals, organic compounds, synthetic organic compounds, oil, and non-chemical pollutants. We're going to go through all of these in detail. I'm going to start with human wastewater. Human wastewater is water produced by human activities, including human sewage from toilets and gray water from things like laundry and dishes. Many people in the world use the same water for drinking, bathing, washing, and disposing of sewage, all with that same water. There are three major reasons that scientists are concerned about human wastewater. One of them is that wastewater dumped into bodies of water undergoes decomposition by bacteria, which creates a large demand for oxygen in the water. The second one is that nutrients released can make water more fertile, which would cause eutrophication. And then three, wastewater can carry a wide variety of disease-causing organisms. So these are our three main concerns. So if we want to move on and look at oxygen demand, oxygen-demanding waste is organic matter that enters a body of water and feeds the growth of microbes that are decomposers. So we have these decomposers that are there, and these microbes that want to do this decomposing of this organic matter require oxygen to do their decomposing. So the more waste there is, the more decomposing they're going to do, and the more oxygen that they're going to use up. BOD, which is a term that we need to know, and we looked at dissolved oxygen. But biochemical oxygen demand is the amount of oxygen a quantity of water uses over a period of time at a specific temperature. Colder water holds more oxygen. Warmer water holds less oxygen. That's going to become important when we look at thermal pollution. If we have a low biological oxygen demand, we usually have low pollution. And high biological oxygen demand equals high pollution. Low oxygen can be lethal to fish, and so we can end up with a dead zone. We have so little oxygen, and so we have so little life. This is going to be highlighted in the Gulf Coast. So if we want to look at this idea of eutrophication, eutrophication is a phenomenon in which a body of water becomes rich in nutrients. So the products of decompositions are nitrogen and phosphorus, and there are also sources come from soaps and detergents. You might have seen phosphate-free detergent. The decomposition of wastewater can increase these products, these nitrogen and phosphorus, and agriculture can also increase them because we know that those are the main components of fertilizer. And we have this idea of what's called cultural eutrophication. So that means humans are causing this, extra nutrients to come in water. We need some nutrients in water, obviously, but cultural eutrophication is when humans are putting too many nutrients in the water. And this is going to cause a rapid growth of algae, which is going to be an algae bloom. The algae bloom dies, and then the decomposers come in to decompose up that algae, and it uses up the oxygen. The big example of this is right where the Mississippi River dumps into the Gulf. That we have a dead zone right at the end of the Mississippi River because it's picking up all of that cultural eutrophication. It's picking up all of those sources of nitrogen and phosphorus and causing algae blooms. There are 200 dead zones globally. So why is eutrophication a bad thing? We have sewage. It enriches the water, which is going to cause an explosion in algae, bacteria, and decomposer populations, which is going to increase the need for biological oxygen demand. We're going to increase that oxygen use. Therefore, the oxygen levels in the water are going to drop and decrease, and that's going to lead to fish kills. So now we're going to take a look at some disease-causing organisms. So pathogens. Pathogens are illness-causing viruses, bacteria, and parasites. They're found in human wastewater. They can cause things such as cholera, typhoid fever, various types of stomach flu and diarrhea. Worldwide, cholera and hepatitis A, which is often in the developing world. The World Health Organization estimates that 1.1 billion, 1/6 of the world's population, do not have access to clean water. Half of the 3.1 million deaths from diarrhea and malaria could be prevented just with safe drinking water and sanitation. And 42% of the world's population lacks access to proper sanitation. So we have a definite problem in terms of clean water and how we're dealing with our wastewater and our sewage. We check our water with things that are called an indicator species. And we're going to see this term used a couple different times. And this is one way. An indicator species is an organism that indicates whether disease-causing pathogens are present. We looked at some of our highly sensitive taxa as indicator species. If those taxa could survive in our stream, then we know that we have good stream health. And so we can pick different organisms that are sensitive to be indicator species. One of the main ones that we use in water is something called fecal coliform bacteria. It's a generally harmless bacteria that lives in the human intestines. We refer to it as E. coli. It's harmless if it's there, but if we find that in water, that means that human waste has entered that water. That's one way for us to test. It shouldn't be there unless human waste has contaminated that water. If we're looking at some human wastewater treatments, we're going to look at septic systems, which are found in rural areas or areas of low population density. So many people here have septic systems, not everyone. Some of our towns have sewage treatment plants, but septic is pretty common around here. Your septic tank receives wastewater from the house. It's buried underground, so you know where your tank is. And in that tank, it's a holding tank, and it forms 3 layers. The top layer forms a layer of scum. That's where it comes in. The middle layer is referred to as septage, which is fairly clear, and the bottom layer settles out and has become sludge. Okay? The septage contains bacteria, pathogens, phosphorus, and nitrogens, and it moves by gravity through pipes out to a leach field. So that's out in your yard. You have a leach field out in your yard if you have a septic system. It seeps out very slowly, and it's filtered by the surrounding soil. So the soil around your house takes care of that bacteria, those pathogens, that extra phosphorus and nitrogen. It's nice because there's no electricity used, but every so many years, you need to get that sludge you need to have somebody come and pump that sludge out, or your tank will fill. and then could potentially back up. Sewage treatment plants are centralized plants in areas with large populations, and they receive wastewater via a network of underground pipes. There's two main treatments that go on that you need to be aware of. The first one is primary treatment. So primary treatment, the goal is for solid waste material to settle out of the wastewater. We try to digest with the bacteria, and then the dried sludge that's at the bottom is transported to a landfill. Okay, so we try to break that down as much as possible. So we settle out the solid stuff, we dry it out, we send that to the landfill. Secondary treatment is now we're going to use bacteria to break down 85 to 90% of that organic matter and convert it to carbon dioxide, nitrogen, phosphorus. We're going to aerate it to promote aerobic bacteria because they stink much less than anaerobic bacteria. So to breaking that down, we want to have our oxygen-using bacteria. And then we're going to let it sit and settle again. Okay, we're going to get whatever other sludge that we have out and take that to the dump. And then the water that's left is disinfected with chlorine, ozone, or ultraviolet. These are all ways to purify water. And then we re-release it back into a lake or a river, so it's part of the water cycle again. If nitrogen and phosphorus are released, they are sort of acting as fertilizers to that water, so they might increase the algae. So it's not a perfect system. And one of the problems is sometimes storm drains feed also into sewage treatment plants. And so if we have a really particularly huge downpour, something like a hurricane or something like that, the plants get overwhelmed. And when they get overwhelmed, they are allowed to just pump directly back into water to keep themselves from overflowing. So it's not just the stormwater that's overflowing, it's all the sewage. There are 40,000 times a year in the United States that sewage is just pumped directly back into water sources. And so we need to update and deal with these older plants that are having these problems. If we take a look at a sewage treatment plant, which we do need to be aware of, and how this works, if you look at step 1, underground pipes carry waste to the treatment plant. 2, the large debris is filtered out by screens and sent to the landfill. Okay, so that's where we take that out. 3, the solid waste, the sludge, settles to the bottom of the tanks. And then 4, bacteria break down the organic material into carbon dioxide and inorganic nutrients. The settled particles are added to the sludge. The sludge is thickened by removing the water. We don't want to take anything extra with us to the dump. We want to take the minimum amount possible, keep the water there. The thickened sludge is taken to the landfill. The water that's already gone through secondary treatment there is exposed to chemicals or ultraviolet light, things like chlorine, to kill pathogens. And then that treated water, like I said, is re-released. This is a good place to stop here because then we'll move into heavy metals.